Шановні колеги, ми продовжуємо роботу. Тема наступної події. Моніторингова місія ООН з прав людини в Україні презентує 16-ту доповідь про ситуацію із правами людини в Україні. Нашим гостем є Fiona Frazer, голова моніторингової місії ООН з прав людини в Україні. Miss Frazer, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to the launch of the 16th report of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. Our mission has been present in Ukraine since April 2014. For over 2.5 years, we have been working with the government of Ukraine to try to improve the human rights situation in the country for everyone. This has been a difficult time, characterized by armed conflict, social and institutional disruption and change. Our mandate to promote and protect human rights is based on making sure no one is left behind, isolated, or forgotten. We have done this through speaking to countless victims and witnesses of human rights violations and abuses and bringing their voices to you through our reports. At times, our messages have been difficult and unpopular as we have strived to reflect the reality of life for those living in the areas controlled by the armed groups or living near the contact line in government-controlled areas or those in detention or on trial. But we believe that everyone deserves the dignity of having their voice heard. In this report, which covers the 3-month period of the 16th of August to the 15th of November 2016, we set out our findings based on interviews with 176 victims and witnesses of human rights violations and abuses. During this period, there was a surge in diplomatic efforts to de-escalate hostilities, and with this, we did see an overall decrease in civilian casualties in these past 3 months. In September, casualties fell fourfold compared to August. But the lack of compliance with the ceasefire by government forces and armed groups led to a resurgence in fighting, and in October, civilian casualties scaled up to the levels we saw over the summer. In November and early December, they again decreased, and we hope that this trend will continue. In total, we recorded 32 conflict-related civilian deaths and 132 injuries occurring in this 3-month reporting period. In addition to recording casualties, we conduct interviews with the families of killed and injured civilians, which reveal the devastation and harm caused by the ongoing armed conflict in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. In Donetsk, a woman asked our team, "We just want to know, when will this infernal war end?" Those who flee the fighting in the east or leave their homes in Crimea and are internally displaced face further difficulties. Many are subject to onerous and disproportionate obstacles to obtaining their social entitlements, and during this reporting period, we have observed that some have been forcibly evicted, leading to secondary displacement. The verification process continues to raise concerns over IDP's personal data protection, and on this we are following up further with the government. We have documented how, for some, their lives as IDPs were so unbearable that they felt they had no choice but to return to armed group-controlled territory. Movement across the contact line for individuals, many elderly, continues to be severely constrained. A woman crossing the contact line in a wheelchair told our team, "I do not know how high my pension should be to make me go through all the humiliation of crossing the contact line again." And yet, an average 25,000 people make the crossing every day. They face disproportionate restrictions on their freedom of movement, as they have to stand in long lines in heavily mined areas to cross through only 5 checkpoints, one of which is a wooden ramp for pedestrians connecting parts of a destroyed bridge in Stanitsa Luganska. The effects of these restrictions would seem to be punishing those who maintain ties with relatives and communities across the contact line. One day, it is these community ties that will form the foundation of peace, and they must be fostered rather than severed. There are many people across Ukraine suffering as a result of the armed conflict, not just in the east. We have met with the families of soldiers detained by the armed groups or missing in action. The exact number of individuals who are missing as a result of the conflict is not known. The families of missing persons continue to suffer, searching for their relatives. We are, though, encouraged by the registration in Parliament on the 22nd of November of a draft law on the legal status of missing persons. We hope that its implementation will ease the suffering of those searching for their loved ones. The suffering of many families on both sides of the contact line is aggravated by the uncertainty and delays around simultaneous releases or so-called exchanges of detainees. In anticipation of an exchange, detainees are often held incommunicado for months. Currently, there are 5 who had been held in unacknowledged detention in Kharkiv SBU and whose whereabouts have been unknown. Families of those detained see their relatives treated as human currency between the warring parties. The self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic continue to detain people, including minors, and deny external observers regular and unfettered access to places of detention. This aggravates the suffering of families, as detainees are often held without contact with the outside world. Further, this takes place in a climate where we observe restrictions on fundamental freedoms in both the self-proclaimed republics that hinders the freedom of expression. Accountability is critical for Ukraine's future and providing a sense of justice to victims. Remedy is important not only for the families of those killed over the last 2.5 years, but also for those who lost their homes and livelihoods. More and more people living in the conflict-affected area are approaching our mission to complain about military presence in their homes and villages, of mines contaminating their fields, and trenches devastating the pastures. The government needs to start addressing these issues now. We note that there has recently been progress in investigations and prosecutions in the context of the violence at Maidan, in the armed conflict, in relation to the armed conflict and against armed group commanders. However, no such progress has been made in the proceedings into the 2nd of May 2014 violence in Odessa. These proceedings continue to be characterized by interference with the independence of the judiciary. We welcome the constitutional amendments regarding the judiciary introduced on the 30th of September. These set out a clear path of reform towards the restoration of public trust in the judiciary. While we continue to be denied access to the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, we are utilizing a network of contacts to monitor the human rights situation there in line with General Assembly Resolution 68262 on the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We have documented how members of the Mejlis continue to be subject to sanctions, including arbitrary detention, and that Crimean Hizb ut-Tahrir members are faced with prosecution in Russian Federation courts. The ongoing transfer of detainees from Crimea to penitentiary facilities in the Russian Federation is also of serious concern. On the 8th of September, a detainee from Sevastopol died in a prison facility in the Russian Federation where he had been transferred to from Crimea in early 2016. You can find more details of all of the points that I've mentioned, as well as many others, in the report that we are launching today. Finally, the day after tomorrow, 10th of December, is Human Rights Day. Together with the UN family, we are urging everyone to follow up the motto of a campaign that starts tomorrow and will last for 1 year. And it's called Stand Up for Someone's Rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Frazer. Do we have any questions, dear colleagues?
Дякую, пані Фрейзер, шановні колеги.
Or in Ukrainian? Чи є запитання або уточнення? Будь ласка, представляйтесь.
Лілія Ржеуцька, Deutsche Welle. In your report you say that cases of sexual and gender-based violence on the checkpoints have been documented. Can you please expand on that, because it's very serious. These checkpoints connect the government-controlled areas and territories under the armed groups. I mean, what kind of sexual violence do you mean, and from which side does it take place?
Thank you very much for the question, and also thank you for highlighting this particular point. As you've rightly pointed out, it's a very important violation, and we have been trying to follow the situation with regard to allegations and reports of conflict-related sexual violence ever since the conflict started. It's a very sensitive question, a very sensitive issue, and we believe it's very, very important to ensure that there is proper verification of any allegation that comes to us. In the report, we do highlight the evolving situation. So I think you can find there all the details that you want, and if you want to hear any more particular references on this issue, then we can follow up with you on potential any individual cases or patterns that we have seen. But I think that it's suffice to say that there is documentation out there, there are serious allegations, and we continue to work with partners as well as parties to the conflict to ensure that what has been documented to date doesn't develop any further, and that we can try to bring to a halt so that we don't see this developing into a further trend.
Дякую. Чи є ще запитання? Будь ласка.
Артем Лаптієв, Крим Реалії.
Situation with human rights in Crimea with previously report.
So, as I highlighted a few of the key developments that we've seen in the last 3 months period that have taken place in Crimea. And again, if you go look in the report, you can see those that expanded. There's more detail on the points that I expanded on. There's continuing harassment for the Mejlis. There is then the transfer of prisoners to the Russian Federation, and the question of access to medical health care. So we continue to monitor, to evaluate what is actually going on in Crimea, despite the fact that we don't have our own direct access. We do this through our network, as I highlighted. So these are the main kind of areas that we've seen that is of a slight difference to the last period.
Колеги, чи є ще запитання або уточнення? We don't have further questions, so we close the press conference at this point. Thank you for coming and looking forward to seeing you here in the nearest future.